If I look at the details, I'll let you know if it's serious. Oh, okay. I'll look at it. Okay. We'll talk about it afterwards. Good evening, guys. Glad to see everybody this evening. Once again, I've missed a Sunday. You know, maybe there's a pattern starting to form. I don't know. Yeah, this is true. This is true. Someone, huh? That's what I've heard. That's what I have heard.
So we don't know how to run the computer.
That's okay. That has been on my mind, though. We'll find a remedy. We will find a remedy. Glad to be back. I am done with the gospel meeting, at least my portion. That still goes on till Friday. But I am glad to be back. At least I will be here Sunday, Lord willing. So that's one less worry for Steve to worry about. Unless, Lord willing, something just weird happens. But Lord willing, it doesn't. Lord willing, it doesn't. We'll go ahead, begin with a word of prayer, and then we'll kind of catch back up as to where we left off last week in our lesson dealing with laws and commandments. How can we tell when we read the Bible what applies to us, what doesn't apply to us, and how do we work with people who say that we're under the Old Testament law, whereas we're under the New Testament law? We'll talk about that here in a second. We'll ask Brother Philip if he can go ahead and lead us in a prayer, and then we'll begin. Amen. Thank you. Okay, if you have your Bible, open up to Genesis chapter 6. Genesis chapter 6, we kind of left off on a question as we were looking at the different types of ways that the Bible commands, both in the Old Testament and in the New Testament. And we started off with, first off, the reason that people are very confused as to what's commanded today and what's not is that they don't identify there's a difference in law system. We're not under the Old Testament law today. And we looked at Galatians chapter 4, and we looked at that analogy that Paul would use where there's those two mountains. There's Mount Sinai, and then there's this new mountain of this new law that's born from the free woman. And we're under the New Testament law, that free woman that Paul would talk about. So in Genesis 2, our next question, once we figure out, or Genesis 6, our next question after we figure out what law system are we under today, I want to see, how does the Bible command? Now, we're using Genesis 6 to make a point. And then we're going to jump into the New Testament, and we're going to see what is the scope that we find how God commands, and what are different ways that we can identify what is commanded and what is not. When you look at Genesis 6, someone just give me a snapshot. What's in this chapter? It'd be the flood. It'd be the flood. It's about to rain a few days here. So in Genesis 6, we find Noah and the ark. And it would tell us in Genesis chapter 6, beginning in verse number 5, that the Lord saw that wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that the intent of every thought of his heart was on evil continually. So the Lord was sorry that he made man on the earth, and he was grieved in his heart. So he said, verse 7, I'll destroy man, from whom I've created from the face of the earth, both man and beast, creeping things, and birds of the air, for I'm sorry that I made them. But Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. Now this grace or favor that God is going to show Noah, God is going to do something that God's mercy in any covenant is displayed this way. In finding favor with God, or Noah really finding favor toward God, and God finding favor toward Noah, it would tell us God informed Noah something. And this is part of God's grace. If God likes you, so to speak, He'll tell you what you need to do to be saved. Well, that's the gospel. He's given that to all mankind. So God's grace tells us how we can refuse ungodliness and wickedness. That's Titus chapter 2. But notice what God would tell Noah. He would say, verse 13, the end of all flesh has come to me. Therefore, the earth is filled with violence through them, and behold, I'll destroy them with the earth. So make yourself an ark of gopher wood, make rooms in the ark, cover it inside and outside with pitch, and this is how you'll make it. Now it gives the dimensions there. And he says in verse 17, I'm going to bring floodwaters on the earth to destroy from under heaven all the flesh, which is the breath of life. Everything that's on the earth shall die. But I will establish my covenant with you, and you will go into the ark, you, your sons, your wife, your sons' wives with you. Every living thing of all flesh, verse 19, you'll bring 2 of every sort into the ark, and keep them alive with you, and they shall be male and female. Go down to verse number 22. The text would tell us after God gave Noah the commands, thus Noah did according to all that God had commanded him. So he did. The main commandments that we left off was verse 14, make an ark of gopher wood. He specifies what type of wood. He even says what to do within the ark. You're going to make rooms in this ark. You're going to cover the rooms of the ark inside and out with pitch. And then he gives the specific dimensions, verse 15 and following. If you look in verse number, Verse number 18, or verse number 19 and following, there will be animals that will also go with them. What they were to do, verse 21, was take food that they would eat on the ark, and it would be food for the animals as well. So all these things Noah did. Now the question where we left off last week was, where's the commandment for Noah to be able to use a hammer? And the answer is, build an ark. There are commandments that God gives, and we left off last week, like we are to partake of the Lord's Supper on the first day of the week. Where's the specific command that says, thou shalt use a tray made of silver, or a tray made of gold, or a tray made of wood, or use 1 cup, or use a paper-covered container? Where's that specific commandment for take the Lord's Supper? There's not one. There are some expectations that God expects for His people to understand, is what we call, and we talked about it last week, this idea of generic authority. Generic authority is this idea where God commands a specific thing to be done, but the way that I go about fulfilling that specific command is not specified. I'm just told I need to do it. So when we gather on the first day of the week, that's following what command? Is there a command? Where is it found? Or how is it found? I think that's the better statement. Apostolic example. Yes, that's the apostolic example. That goes to Philippians chapter 4 and verse 9. If we want to look at a New Testament illustration of a specific command, or a specific command through example, but then the details as to how we do that, that's going to vary from place to place. In Philippians chapter 4 and verse 9, Paul would say something to the extent of, those things which you saw, heard, learned, read of me, these things do, and the God of peace will be with you. So if I look at the life of Paul, I should be able to find out what is commanded by God. Now, I can also look at the life of Paul, and I will find out that Paul did some things that aren't commanded under the law of Christ, but passages like 1 Corinthians chapter 9, also Romans chapter 14, Paul made himself he became all things to all men, that he might by all means save some. So for the Jews, if he wanted to go talk to a Jew, he made sure the people that were with him were circumcised so they wouldn't become offended. Now, if he were to turn around and say, under the law of Christ, you must be circumcised, would that be wrong? Yes, that's Acts 15. In fact, he's one of the people who were saying, we can't command that people be circumcised under the old law or from the old law and expect them to keep the new law. Those are two different covenants. So in the New Testament, here's the commandment to meet on the first day of the week. Acts chapter 20, verse number 7, apostolic example. And when they came together on the first day of the week to break bread, and then we've got that preaching until midnight. Now, why do we get the Lord's Supper part right, but we don't get the preaching to midnight part right? I'm kidding. That's not it. Oh, we start too early?
We just don't have a preacher who preaches that.
Oh, okay. We don't have a preacher who can preach that long. That is a command that's given by example. Now, okay. Now we're getting to the next part. So, in Acts 20, verse 7, they came together on the first day of the week. What time?
Sundown.
It has to be sun up because Jesus rose. That's good. No. Well, see, now this is going to be interesting. So some would still practice it by Jewish time. Some would practice according to Roman time. And then what about this thing we have called time zones? Don't we have to try to recalibrate what time they would have worshipped back then? And we had to fit it within their time zone? 10 a.m. That's the scripture authorized one. It doesn't give us a specific time during that day. It just says on the first day of the week they came together. Is it possible for us to fulfill that example to worship on the first day of the week? Yes, that's specific authority. Generic authority, follow-up question, what time? Answer, what best works with the congregation? That's the answer. Traditionally, it would be 10 a.m. Bible study, 11 a.m. morning worship, 6 p.m. or 7 p.m. or 6:30 p.m. When I went to Johnson City, there's like 4 different times, so that kind of threw me off. But there's some people who on Sunday morning, they'll have worship at 8:30 a.m. There was one who was 8 o'clock, and we got done by 10:30. I didn't know what to do, but nobody was in line for lunch. But because there's not a specific time, but there is a specific day, God expects us to understand how to work within specific guidelines and make some subjective choices from them. Where's the commandment, thou shalt meet on Wednesdays? There's not one. So why do we meet on Wednesdays? Huh? Sort of. It is a man-made time, yeah. Because some people actually have midweek Bible study on Tuesday, which isn't necessarily midweek. Some have it on Thursday, and some even on Monday. I've heard of one congregation had one on Friday. So which one's right? According to what? Okay, so I can answer this from if a congregation has men who the congregation has agreed with what the men's decision is, or elders in the congregation. Elders in the congregation, I can hit more of a here's the specific verses. If they don't have elders, there's a different way we're going to answer this. I want you to look over in 1 Peter chapter 5. 1 Peter chapter 5. Now, if we think on what is the responsibility of the elders towards the congregation, what are some of those things? Okay, so watchers over the flock, keep the flock together. What else?
Make sure that what's being taught is the gospel.
Yeah, make sure what's being taught is the gospel, and if they find individuals who teach something contrary to the truth, that they, through their faith, may be able to teach them their error and guide that person who's in the wrong to the truth. Now, there are some more things elders are to be in 1 Timothy 3 and Titus chapter 1. Spiritually fed. Now, this goes to how they watch over the sheep. And this is Hebrews chapter 13, I believe it is, and verse number 17. Let me make sure I've got the right verse on that. No. Yes. 13 verse 17. Obey those who have rule over you, and be submissive, for they watch out for your souls as those who must give an account. Let them do so with joy, not with grief, for that would be unprofitable for you. Now, I said 1 Peter chapter 5 for this reason. In the beginning of chapter 5, Peter gives some encouragement to the elders, but then he moves his attention over to everyone else, especially the younger individuals. Notice the text here. In verse number 1, chapter 5 of 1 Peter, the elders who are among you I exhort, I who am a fellow elder and a witness of the sufferings of Christ, also a partaker of the glory that will be revealed, shepherd the flock of God which is among you, serving as overseers, not by compulsion, but willingly, not for dishonest gain, but eagerly, nor as being lords over those entrusted to you, but being examples to the flock, that when the chief shepherd appears, you'll receive the crown of glory that does not fade away. Likewise, verse 5, you younger people, submit yourselves to your elders. Parenting. What is it called when you are expected to care for a child and you neglect those duties by letting the child starve, and or you just kind of feed them when they say, I'm hungry, but you refuse to put them into education? Either way, whether you malnourish them or you maleducate them, that's called what? That's child abuse. Spiritually speaking, if we identify that from a parenting perspective, aren't the elders in charge of making sure the sheep are spiritually fed and not malnourished? Here's where we get into the purpose of midweek Bible study. If it was the case that only 1 hour a week could actually prepare men to become elders, or women to become elders' wives, or men to become deacons, or women to become good deacons' wives, or men to be trained to become preachers, or enough time for the family of God to meet together. That's one thing. But education even shows, if you only spend 1 hour in school a week, what's going to happen to all those test scores that they expect people to pass? How bad? Keep going. How bad? That's not education. Good education is realizing needs and how to fit those needs. Now, let's get to this. If the elders say, we're going to meet Sunday and we'll have time 1, time 2, time 3, and we say Wednesday at this time. There are some people who say, I am commanded just to meet on the first day of the week, and this is good enough, Sunday morning. In fact, thankfully, I will praise us in this. We are one of the congregations that make less excuses for all the various services compared to other congregations. And I praise everyone for that. People are working on their attendance. That's wonderful. But midweek Bible study, Sunday evening, Sunday morning Bible class, and regardless of time, let's just take out time out of the equation. Which one of these are not actually commanded? If the elders deem best for feeding and nourishing the flock, which of these are not commanded? If the elders deem it necessary to best feed the flock this way, that is the binding commandment from God. Not because the elders are God, but because God has given the elders the ability to do that. Now, what our responsibility as the sheep of the fold in trying to support and help the elders is that by command, 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 5, you younger people submit yourselves to your elders. Now, are there other passages in the Bible that tell us we are to submit to one another? Absolutely. We normally look at Ephesians chapter 5 as the husband and wife submission. But do you know that even going into chapter 6, it talks about children towards fathers and also servants towards masters? If we're going to display wisdom, Ephesians 5, verse 15, see that you walk circumspectly, not as fools, but as wise, redeeming the time, for the days are evil. How can we know what the will of the Lord is? And it gives all those different characteristics: singing, making melody in your heart to the Lord, teaching one another in songs, hymns, spiritual songs, singing and making melody in your heart to the Lord, submitting to one another. That's daily Christian living. What makes these binding commands, though there is a specific command to meet on the first day of the week, is what have the elders requested the sheep to do? Now, the next question will be like, well, what if something comes up? And for some reason, that just seems to come up in conversation. I think we understand there's a concept called an ox in the ditch, isn't there? Sometimes people's fields catch on fire, don't they, David? And you got to go help them put out those fires. That happened. We'll still have a talk about that afterwards. I'm kidding. But sometimes, like, you get sick. What if I don't want to get you sick? I want to be here. I want to praise God, but I don't want to get you sick. I'll stay home. Thankfully, we have this idea of being able to at least stream lessons. That's not the same as actually being in the assembly. I have to look at it from a first century lens. Forsaking not the assembly meant that some of them were forsaking the being in person. We have to realize 21st century provided other ways of being exposed to the information. So what I'm getting at is that in fulfilling a specific command, there are some subjective parts to it that are up for just opinions. But certain decisions that are made within those opinions That's where we start to get to congregational authority, which is how the church functions. It is autonomous. Rogersville Church of Christ is a different autonomous body as opposed to the Tazewell Church of Christ. Now, we all belong to Christ, but the decisions that they make for best helping the people and the brethren at Tazewell is not binding to what we follow here at Rogersville. Do we get what I'm saying? Same Lord, but we are different congregations. Look at Revelation 2 and Revelation 3. Why wasn't the church at Laodicea told to fix the same things at Ephesus as opposed to Pergamos or Thyatira or any of the other congregations there? Because they are all autonomous, even though they function under the same ceiling. So, which service is not scriptural? That's where people get in trouble, because they try to justify, well, that's just simply not an assembly. Now, here's another, yeah, Jim?
What if
What if? Okay.
the elders, the two elders, decide we're going to meet 6 times on Sunday, we're going to meet twice on Wednesday, we're going to meet on Thursday.
Okay. So we're going to meet 6 times?
We have to work out that, but it's something I've always wondered.
So if you look in Acts chapter 6, does everybody get the general question that Jim asked? What if the elders overboard trying to spiritually feed sheep? So they want to spiritually waterlog everyone. But some people can look at it this way, as opposed to other people may look at it, man, I get to hear Ethan 9 times in the week. No, 8 times. No, actually, we'll split it. Maybe? You want 4 of those? No? 2? 1? Maybe? So, what happens if the elders were to say, we're going to meet 6 times on Sunday, and then we're going to meet 1 on Tuesday, and 1 on Wednesday, and 1 Thursday, and 1 Friday? What if they go overboard? Well, this is also another expectation of good parenting. Now, let's use this as a model, and then we're going to look at some scriptures for this. Your child's hungry. You feed them. You feed them to the point that they say, no, no, no. You keep feeding them. And you keep feeding them. And you keep feeding them. What's going to happen? They're going to throw up. Or you are actually going to kill your child by overfeeding them. Elders are also supposed to use good judgment. According to Acts chapter 6, they're to use good judgment based on the needs of the congregation. That's key. In 1 Peter 5, notice the phrasing that's used in verse number 2. Serving or shepherding the flock of God, not by compulsion, but willingly, not for dishonest gain, but eagerly, not as being lords over those entrusted to you, but being examples of the flock. Now, I'm going to ask this, but I say this as a joke. Lum, could you handle hearing me 9 times a week? Okay, so we'll leave it with no comment. If they understand that people's attention, time span, and even availability, that is simply not reasonable, then good, mature elders will take that into consideration. They will make the needs for the congregation to be able to be met, not by overexerting a number of times to meet, but rather trying to best appeal to those needs. Now, over time, because traditionally it's, David, I've not forgotten you. I'll get you here in a second. Traditionally, it's normally been like a Bible class, a Sunday morning, a Sunday evening, and a Wednesday night. What if the needs of the congregation changes to where some of that needs to be modified a little bit? Is that wrong? No, that's tending to the needs of the sheep. So for elders to overly expect the congregation, now we get to Acts chapter 6. And this is one of those things that they don't talk about. And I don't say this because I don't want elders. I love the elders that we have. And I hope they continue. And I hope we have more elders that follow with them and after them. But as people put elders into position because they meet the qualifications, not because they say, I want this person, they meet the biblical mandate. People have to say, hey, I would love for this person to become an elder. The congregation has to make that decision. Even in taking an elder out of that position, they can do that as a congregation or by death. But we're not going to talk about that. I want you to live many years, many years. So there are some give and take things and some expectations that are involved with this. And if there's some kind of disagreement in light of this, then a good, healthy congregation, sheep normally, good, healthy sheep will do this to the shepherd. Are you listening? Are you listening? Bah, bah, bah. If you're the shepherd, what is that indicating? They're hungry. They need help. But the sheep got to cry out. And or sometimes it may work opposite. The shepherd is going out and checking out the sheep, and little Joey sheep over here, because they named their sheep Joey, he's lying over here on the ground. Something's wrong with Joey. So sometimes it works both ways. Shepherds can't know there is a problem sometimes unless people let it be known to the elders. It works that way across the congregation. If you have fault with a brother, what are you to do? You go to him. Communication. So does that make sense? There's an expectation God has where they use mature judgment and how they work with this. But also it's got to be with not just the congregation's best interest in mind, but according to Acts chapter 6, the congregation made known to the brethren and the apostles in Jerusalem, hey, we have a ministration that's being neglected. We need this fixed. And they solved it as a congregation. So does that answer that, maybe? Yeah. But that's a good question. That's really good.
Also, to his point, when you talk about like having 5 different services, the elders can say that, but they can also, I mean, they can say we're going to meet, but is it a requirement for everyone? We're going to come together, there's something wrong with everybody coming together and studying and worshiping every day of the week if they want to. Does that mean that everybody is required to be here on that date? It talks about, I'm sure the first century Christians didn't all meet together every day. I'm sure the apostles were meeting together every day, not just having the assembly or partaking of the Lord's Supper like we're discussing. So how do you justify that versus we're going to have a get together, everybody's coming together, we're going to discuss Bible stuff, but whatever. But is that assembly?
Okay.
Or if we're just in this room, we're in this one building, this is the assembly.
So so Steve, I'm going to ask you a question because I'm hoping the verse popped up in your mind. So in Acts chapter 2, how frequently did they meet?
Just day by day, they met in the temple courts, breaking bread and eating together and things of that nature.
Daily in the temple. Now, here's something, and there's a couple of statements I got to make in light of that because that's not just a one statement thing. So let's say that we had Sunday, we've got a Bible class. We've got Monday. We got Sunday morning worship. We got Sunday evening. So we got 3 events on Sunday. Monday, we've got a men's group that meets that evening, and that's every other week. And then on Tuesday, there's a ladies group that meets. Then we got Bible class on Wednesday, and then let's say that we've got a youth gathering every other week on Thursdays, and that's just what we have. And just to let people recover for the week and do what they want to, we got Friday and Saturday open. There is an understanding in the way of how the assembly works. Now, I'm using that term intentionally. Does Hebrews 10:23 through 25 say, but as many as are forsaking the Sunday morning Bible class? Or does it say, as many as are forsaking the Sunday morning worship? Or forsaking the Sunday evening worship? Or forsaking the whatever day of the week, whatever it's called? Is that the terminology that's used in Hebrews 10? What's the word it uses? Assembly. So the assembling of yourselves. Bible class is an assembly. Sunday morning worship is an assembly. Sunday evening worship is an assembly. Wednesday night is also an assembly. Now, we talked about, or at least you mentioned, what time did they meet? In the first century, it would just vary. When you look at when Eutychus fell out of the window, what is that, Acts 20? 20? What, if he preached till midnight, what time was it? Or what was it look like outside? It's dark. It's dark. Now, I know we would love to have a slumber party here overnight on Sunday, going to Monday, and y'all would just love that. In fact, most people would probably fall asleep, or I'd be the only one here and be like, where are you all at? There's a certain expectation that goes along with that. Even though these things are commanded, now we're going to get into a mature one. There are some people who say, if you do not go to all 4 of the offered times, you are sinning. Now there is this thing called life, work, schedule, sicknesses. There are some mature complications for any other day of the week besides Sunday. I'll get back to Sunday here in a moment. That may prevent me from going to a men's Bible study that's only offered maybe once or twice a month, as opposed to a women's Bible study. I just simply can't make it there. There are some things the elders are going to say, hey, we're going to do these things to offer spiritual nourishment. Mature Christianity is going to determine, okay, is this something that I can actually do? Or is it just simply impossible for me to do? Some people will say you're sinning if you don't go to all the extra things. But the extra things are there to provide what? Nourishment. In school, you have your normal education classes, but aren't there after-school activities too that people can sign up for? How do you get gooder at education? You got to study. How do you get gooder at sports? You got to spend time to practice. How do you get gooder at acting? Or I know I'm using gooder the wrong way. It should be goodest. I'm kidding. How do you get better at stuff? You got to spend time with it. All the things that we offer, if we were to offer stuff every single day, it is simply to provide an opportunity that you can grow. Will you be able to physically be able to go to all of it? Probably not. And I'm thinking the reason I bring up the different times that they worship, there may have been a Sunday where most of the servants in that city, because congregations were mostly made up of servants. That's why we read those strange statements where servants are to obey their masters. Some of them may have had to work to where they couldn't even meet when the normal assembly met. But I do know this, they kept in contact with each other. Acts 2 is a prime example of that. They met daily in the temple. And then as you go through the book of Acts, they stopped meeting in the temple for some reason. What happened? I don't know. Maybe Christianity became associated with Judaism, which historically that is what happened. And then they found out there was a difference. Now, what if it's a Sunday? Now we're going to get really mature in our decision making. The commandment is to do what? Meet on the first day of the week. We are to assemble. Now, we have 3 times: Bible class, Sunday morning worship, Sunday evening worship. What's going to determine whether or not I'm going to be at all 3, or I'm only going to be at 2, or I'm only able to be at 1? Here's the complexity of that answer. Because we live in a society with structure, and we live in a society with schedules, there is an idea where people say if you cannot be at all 3, you are a sinner. Now, if I'm just looking at the book by itself, do not forsake the assembly, that means don't forsake the assembly. That's very straightforward. Now, what if you have complications waking up early? You're really struggle busing, man. You are really struggle busing. And there is no way with all of your effort you're going to be able to make what you would consider to be the normal time to assemble. Does God not know that? God does understand those circumstances. Now let's change that. what if you're perfectly able to do so? But you decide, instead of coming to assemble to praise God or learn of God, you want to get better at one of your hobbies. Well, that's a different conversation. I would look at Matthew 6:33, very simple verse. Seek ye first your hobbies and God's righteousness, and all these things will be added to you. Is that what the verse reads? No. Mature Christianity is going to question, what exactly am I doing on God's day? I have these times available to me, and what am I going to do in trying to go to those? Now, in doing that, not only do you fulfill the commandment, but what other questions may come up? Because I know there's a variety of thought on this. What other questions come up in light of, well, I can't make this, but I can make this service. And if I can only make one service out of 3 services, or if I can only make 2 services out of those 3 services, or maybe I can't go to any at all. How do we work through that?
Yeah. Here's the kind of what's going through my mind right now. We come together on the Sunday to be fed, okay? We're being fed, hopefully. I know you talk about that being fed. Now, that's fine, but if I don't learn how to feed myself, or someone teach me how to feed myself, I am going to be spiritually in trouble, right? Mm-hmm. So whether I come Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, I better be feeding myself spiritually going every day of the week in some sort of study or some sort of meditation or something at home that I am doing myself. Or because I don't think you can get enough food, like you talked about before, feed, and get sick or something. Well, we never do that. Jesus said, blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, so we have that hunger and thirst. So if we don't learn how, or be taught how to feed ourselves, then we're never going to grow spiritually.
So let me write, we got 2 minutes. 100% agree. We have to know how to feed ourselves. We're going to add on to that here in a second. Philip?
I had a question. Was talking about the elders deciding when we meet and all this stuff. Okay, just for example, say Wednesday night, we probably, the time all the kids get in here and everybody, we probably close to 30 people here. And you got that kind of attendance. And say for some reason the elders decide to change our Wednesday night class to 9 o'clock. And the attendance dropped way down to about 10. How many years do they need to stay with that before they decide they make it stay?
So that's where the mature decision making comes into play. So this is going to go into 2 different areas. So true or false, and this works with preachers as well. Just because a man is qualified and he becomes an elder, does that make him a perfect man the rest of his life? No. It's the same thing with any position in the church. They're human beings. Now, in light of their humanity, in light of trying to do their best to be spiritually mature, I've also got to work, even in light of my own flaws and my own weaknesses, that I'm going to trust that they're going to do what's best for the congregation, and when they deem that something is not functioning the way that it should function, they'll begin to take action on that because of Hebrews 13, verse 17. They will give an account of how they oversee or take care of the souls that they are shepherding, because that's simply how God focuses on that. Now, what's the time frame for that? This is where we get to 1 Corinthians 13. Love is patient and it's kind. One of the worst things that we have as human beings at times is simply our impatience of trying to work through things. And we often find ourselves in need of asking for forgiveness or asking for other people for their patience when we do fall short. And what I'm saying is that the healthy body of Christ not only is going to try to think positive of the elders, but also keep the elders accountable. Talk to them when you feel like they are doing a good job. Compliment them. We are to do good to all, render good to those who deserve that type of honor. but also in trying to help them. Talk to them in private if you feel like something's not where it needs to be. They will listen. They will listen. That is their God-given obligation. Now, how they act on that, just like any other person, sometimes I find even the people that I trust the most in, I still have to remind them about things. I still need to go to them and talk to them and pray for them as they continue to grow and I continue to grow with them. Otherwise, if it's simply a bash fest, where you should be doing this, you should be doing this, you should be doing this, that tends to lead to more bickering and division and a lot of turmoil that the Apostle Paul was trying to tell the church at Corinth. You can learn to love each other and be patient with one another. Is that going to be a beautiful process with no anger or heated conversations or any kind of problems along the way? Every single congregation is going to face problems. But when those problems do arise, how do we work through those problems? So, in light of being patient with them, we also need to try to reason with them at the same time. And if it calls for any other necessary actions to be taking place, then we'll simply do it by the Bible, because that is the best way to work through any problems. Does that kind of answer that? I know there's more to talk about with that, but does that work for now? Okay. That's good. Next week, I want you to think about that idea. Am I able, or is it commanded to be at all three services? And I'm not trying to get out of going to all three services. What I am saying is think about this. Because mature Christianity, this is what we're facing today. People will blow this problem off. Don't. Think of it from a parenting perspective. Put it into a spiritual light, and then see if you can find some passages that help give evidence to the decision or the choice that you've decided. So, thank you for awesome comments tonight. Good discussion. Think on those things. This is good. We'll be back in just a few minutes, and then we'll have the invitation.